The Falcons face critical decisions as Kaleb McGary's replacement and final cuts loom large for the upcoming season.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. With football season around the corner, make sure you check out the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bets right now. So if you do not know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Sirius Black, a.k.a. the iron that sharpens the iron, a.k.a. Mr. a.k.a. And I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for almost 2 decades, formerly at falcfans.com, RIP, still going strong as the humble host of this illustrious podcast. And I thank each and every one of you that goes strong with me as everydayers. That means you make this podcast your first listen each and every day. And all you got to do to become an everydayer is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today we are joined by an illustrious guest. He is Joe Patrick of 92.9 The Game. And we're going to get into Kaleb McGary's replacement, final cut surprises, as well as the expectations for the upcoming season right now. Welcome back, everyone. We are back with an illustrious guest. He is none other than Joe Patrick, who covers the Atlanta Falcons for 92.9 The Game, where, of course, you can hear his illustrious podcast, Joe Patrick on Football, each and every single day. Where did he get that idea of doing a daily podcast about the Atlanta Falcons and football? But Joe is here with us to talk about all things Falcons training camp, final cuts, some roster decisions and moves that they'll be making as we get geared up for the regular season, and ultimately what his expectations are for this upcoming season. But Joe, my friend, welcome back to the show.
Aaron, thanks for having me back on. You know, to get the illustrious tag from an illustrious podcast like yourself is, it's an honor. It's an honor. So, thank you for having me on. We were just discussing. Very happy to actually get into some real football here soon. You know, we've reached the stage of training camp where I think we're all at our wits' end. Not just me, but I think a lot of Falcons fans are just ready for the real stuff. So, excited for that.
Yep. So, the big topic this week obviously is going to be final cuts, and we'll sort of pick your brain on sort of maybe some surprises in terms of players that could be cut or be kept by the Falcons later this week. But I think sort of the bigger topic of the week is, what do the Falcons do along the offensive line with Kaleb McGary, their starting right tackle, going down, Storm Norton, their swing tackle, going down? I'm basically wondering, Joe, do you feel like the Falcons should be expected to make a move to bring in more right tackle help, or will they roll with what they have? Basically, are you buying that Raheem Morris, what he said last week, that they truly believe in their offensive line depth at this stage?
Yeah, it's interesting to hear Raheem's thoughts on the offensive line, especially the reserve offensive line, which we see generate about a yard per carry for the running backs so far this preseason. When he runs through the names, it's like, just all this flowery language, all these plaudits. They're doing great. I'm not so sure. But like, as to what they're going to do at right tackle, like, I don't know if I have anything special to say about it other than what I think you would expect, which is the team to go out there and try to grind the waiver wire, check in with teams, see who's at the, on their roster that they would be willing to part with, that maybe they could do a small trade for. Especially before cuts come down, if they could offer, a 7th round pick or something like that for a player. But ultimately, I don't see them like doing anything splashy with regards to filling this hole. And it's kind of funny to me, Aaron, because it's the loss of McGary that's kind of compounded by the fact that you don't have Storm Norton, who's your swing tag. Well, Storm Norton was just a practice squad snag off the Chargers practice squad, I believe it was a couple years ago. Now, I think that was a pretty good move. He's proven to be a solid swing tackle for this team, but I think that it just goes to show that there's that level of player that I think is going to be available for the Falcons to go out there and potentially get you. And you hope that you get someone that is, as reliable, at least in some facet of their game as Storm Norton has been. I think people like with Storm, it's almost like a backup quarterback situation to me, where it's like, when you're not seeing them, you just think about their best moments and just like everything they're good at. And I think it's easy to forget that like Storm Norton's like nowhere near the run blocker that Kaleb McGary is. Now, Kaleb McGary is like, kind of a bit in the league of his own as regards to, right tackles in the run game. But, Storm is a decent pass blocker. And I think that you can generally rely on finding that kind of player this time of year, whether it's through cuts or a small trade or a practice squad snag. So I don't have too many concerns, but I do think that it's going to be, you're going to lose something when you lose a player like Kaleb McGary. There's a reason why the Falcons felt like they needed to extend him for a couple years. And there's a reason why you can't just go out and get a player of his caliber, in a trade or whatnot.
Okay. Now I'm curious to pick your brain on this, Joe. I've been saying, basically since Wednesday, where, as you mentioned, Kaleb McGary's loss is, potentially going to be a devastating blow to the Falcons run game if they don't get improved play from that right tackle position than what they have traditionally gotten from the Elijah Wilkinsons. And as you mentioned, Storm Norton's this upcoming season in McGary's absence. But I've sort of downplayed sort of whether or not, like, I think a lot of the rhetoric is like, oh no, Michael Penix is going to die because who's going to protect his blind side? I'm just curious, where do you sort of fall on that? Do you feel like this is much more of a, this is going to impact the Falcons run game, or do you feel like the Falcons pass protection is potentially, teetering on the edge or something like that?
No, I mean, I listened to your show, Aaron. I mean, I'm nearly an everydayer, and I think that you've brought some balance to the force here with regards to like the conversation about what McGary's loss actually means. And I think that you've kind of done a good job in grounding a lot of people. It's like, this is about the run game. This is not necessarily about the pass protection. And I also wonder if it could impact the team in some other ways with regards to how they run the ball. Like what, like, are they just going to continue to spam outside zone, or are they going to maybe try to do some more gap scheme stuff? And I think that the latter might be true. And I don't think it's just down to McGary. I think they were probably already thinking this way with regard, when you take into context what the Rams kind of how they adjusted their run scheme, and Zach Robinson coming over. But then also when you lose a player like Drew Dahlman at center, I always thought that he was one of the big pieces on this offensive line that made the outside zone as effective as it was, because he was so good at getting to that second level and picking up those linebackers. And it's not obviously that Ryan Newsel can't be that guy, but I do think that his strengths and his profile are more conducive to some more gap scheme stuff, some more in between the tackles style of running. And I do wonder if this injury might make them feel like that's an even better idea now when you can't just rely on running behind Kaleb McGary. And then the other thing is I wonder if, this could hurt Kyle Pitts if they feel like they need to have Charlie Warner on the field a little bit more to do some of that blocking, especially some of like that insert blocking, which they really starting to use Warner as a tool, or, potentially some other receivers. We've seen Drake London do some insert stuff. And obviously the Rams and Sean McVay like to do that as well. So I think there are some other schematic changes that this injury might kind of force the Falcons' hand into. And I don't think that it's necessarily a bad thing for this run game to get a little bit more diverse than what it's been. And I know that I'm not, other people have mentioned it, that it could even potentially lead to some more explosive run opportunities for Bijan Robinson if he's just, more directly attacking the line of scrimmage.
Yeah. I've talked about that as well, where I feel like, we've gotten the campaign promises of, we're going to diversify the run game and we're going to utilize more play action. And I'm like, well, now you kind of have to do that, because those are kind of the things that, you kind of need to do to potentially hide any issues that you may have at right tackle moving forward. So we'll see if the Falcons, deliver on those campaign promises. We'll see what moves the Falcons wind up making. But I want to pick Joe's brain on, the upcoming cuts that will be made on Tuesday. Or, knowing my luck, it'll be immediately after we record this episode when those drop. But we'll break down sort of, maybe some surprise moves, or maybe some not just players that will be let go, but some guys that may surprise people to stick on this Falcons roster as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. Today's episode of Locked On Falcons is brought to you by FanDuel because we're coming up on a great holiday. It is FanDuel's Futures Day, which is August 26th, which is today or tomorrow, depending on when you're listening to this episode. It is a brand new holiday, the perfect holiday for all the football fans who live for bold predictions and preseason hunches. For just 24 hours, FanDuel is going to give you deals on upcoming NFL season predictions. So whether you want to call your shot on who wins the MVP, like Michael Penix Jr., or you just want to go for the low-hanging fruit like Lamar Jackson, or you're eyeing that long shot dark horse division winner in the NFC South or the AFC West, or you're ready to crown your Super Bowl champion before week one even kicks off, this is your moment. This is the day to celebrate and win some cash. So head over to FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel app today, and you can start planning your futures bets right now, because Futures Day is one day and one day only at FanDuel. Play your game. So before we get into some of the final cut surprises that may come, I want to let people know that Locked On wants to hear from you. We put together a survey to learn more about our listeners and make your favorite podcast, including this one, even better. This is your chance to tell us what you like, what you don't like, and answer a few questions about advertising. Go to lockedonpodcast.com/survey to get started. Everyone who completes a survey will be entered for a chance to win one of 10 $100 Amazon gift cards. Again, that's lockedonpodcast.com/survey, where you can also find the link in the show notes. Thank you for helping us out. So, Joe, the Falcons cut about a dozen guys on Saturday. Morgan Fox, the D tackle, in one of their quote unquote bigger gets of free agency, was on that list of 12. It was a mild surprise, at least I think based off of expectations entering training camp. But as things played out over the course of the summer, you could kind of see the writing on the wall with him sort of getting that fourth quarter work late against the Cowboys in the preseason finale. And it was like, this may not necessarily go the way that people at least originally thought it was going to go back in March when the Falcons signed him. And I'm curious, are there any other players that you think Falcon fans may be a little surprised to see stay or go on this initial 53-man roster? And I'll say for myself, on my most recent quote unquote final 53-man projection, I had the Falcons keeping 4 tight ends, including none other than the illustrious, the incomparable Felipe Franks. So, any sort of, when you're looking at this roster, any things that you think maybe could surprise folks that are maybe not getting enough attention in as far as that goes?
Yeah. No, I think that's a good call with Felipe Franks. I ultimately didn't have him on mine, but I kind of singled him out as a guy who I thought could get cut and be up and active for week one against Tampa Bay, because I think that they value him on special teams that much. And, special teams is where a lot of the surprise cuts and keeps kind of emerge, because you think of these guys as football players and what their position is, and, what their utility to the team tends to be is on special teams. And it's not with these kinds of traits that you associate with their position. And Felipe Franks is a versatile piece. And I should say, people I know are probably sick of Felipe Franks, just generally speaking, but, in camp, especially the last couple of weeks, he makes some plays. He's caught some nice touchdown passes. He had a nice diving touchdown catch in the end zone. And so when you have that kind of ability on top of what we know of him as a special teams player, then that's going to put him in good stead for making the roster and being a contributor. So I ultimately didn't have him on mine, but I could totally see him being on the 53-man. With regards to the cuts, I've got 3 names, and they're maybe going to go from we'll start from least surprising to maybe most or the less likely. First is Clark Phillips. I don't know how surprising this would be to many people at this point, because it feels like this is kind of been a storyline that has just continued throughout this training camp, where he just hasn't played. He hasn't played enough, and when he has played, it's something that you wouldn't see unless you're at the training camp if you're a fan or whatever. But, there are referees there who are, refereeing the 11-on-11 periods. And I notice him get flagged quite a bit. It just comes down to his size. It's just a struggle for him at this level. He has to kind of climb on guys and just be really, really precise when you're that small in coverage. And I just think he struggles at times. And we haven't really seen him be like a huge special teams contributor either. So, and he hasn't played generally. So don't have him making the team. I think maybe the more controversial one for me, where I feel like I'm kind of standing alone in this regard. And again, I would bucket him in a similar to Felipe Franks, where I could very easily see him getting cut and then being on the practice squad and active for week 1, is Jamal Agnew. And kind of for a similar reason to Clark, where he just has not played. He's just not been healthy for a good solid stretch of training camp. I think he finally got back on the field last week when they had a couple practices that were open to the media, and he was returning kicks at that point, but he hadn't been doing anything other than that. I haven't really seen him run with the offense really since maybe like the reserve offensive players in the early days of training camp. So that's one for me where I'm thinking maybe they just put him, try to get him back on the practice squad. And then, for all this that we've said about special teams, Mike Ford for me is just like, there are other players. I don't know. Maybe there's something I'm missing. I need to ask Marquise Williams, the special teams coordinator, about Mike Ford specifically and what he does that like no one else seemingly is capable of doing. But I don't see a reason why like Natron Brooks or Adi Alford or like whoever can't run and tackle in space and charge off the edge on field goal block. Maybe Mike Ford is just really, really good at it. But for me, I just see other players on the roster that are as capable as he would be in special teams. And if it's not for special teams, then I just think there's generally more talented defensive backs than Mike Ford as well. And I know that you would probably agree with that, not to put that in your mouth. But those are the three, I guess, surprising cuts I would throw out there.
Okay. Yes, I'm with you on the Mike Ford thing. I said it before. I'll say it again. I think he's the worst cornerback in the entire NFL when it comes to playing defense. And I don't think he does anything particularly special on special teams that makes up for that difference. I don't understand how he's lasted this long. When he was in Atlanta back in 2022, he was okay on special teams, but nothing to write home about. And so when the Falcons were like, oh, we're definitely bringing Mike Ford back, I'm like, why? But again, I don't get it, but yeah.
So I had Mike Ford on my roster all the way up until this point, and I felt more licensed to remove him from the 53-man when they cut Morgan Fox. And like one of the reasons I figured that Mike Ford would be on the roster is because they signed him to some guaranteed money during the offseason. And if they were willing to part ways with Morgan Fox, who they also did that for, then I'm thinking maybe they would do the same with Ford.
Yeah, I had Ford on my 53-man roster because I'm me and I'm just like, oh, well, the Falcons are going to do at least one thing that's going to piss me off so I can complain about it on the podcast. So that's going to be that one thing. But absolutely, if they wind up cutting him, I'll be like, well, they finally did the right thing. So,
wow, dance on a man's grave there.
Yes. I again, like it sounds harsh. Like I'm normally not the person that's like, oh, I hope they cut this guy because again, I understand. Yeah. All these players are just out here just trying their best and trying to live their dream of playing football. But it never made sense why the Falcons brought him. And hopefully they will do similar things, as you said, with the Morgan Fox signing and realize the error of their ways and be like, we can get the same value, if not more value on both defense and special teams with a younger, cheaper, arguably better player.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And I was like, there was a few weeks ago, they had a practice and, they were using him with the first team in nickel. And at that point, they were still trying to, I think, rotate through some guys and just give guys looks in general. But it was like, Bowman got some reps and then D'Alford got some reps at nickel. And then it was Mike Ford. And he actually got an interception during some of his reps. And it was just like a deflected pass that just fell right into his hands. It's like, of course this happens.
Okay. So. Well, Mike Ford slander aside, let's talk a little bit more big picture stuff about the Falcons' upcoming 2025 season. As Joe said at the top, we're almost there to when real football starts happening, and we can stop speculating about, who's this 53-man guy and who's this guy that's probably going to be inactive on Sundays and whatnot. Who's going to be the guys that are actually going to play on Sunday? And Joe, as someone who has been there at training camp pretty much every single day. Over the last month plus, I want to pick your brain on whether or not your expectations for the Falcons, based off what you've seen over the last month, have been raised, lowered, or stayed the same. And we'll do that to wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. This episode is also presented by Yahoo Fantasy. With the NFL season right around the corner, fantasy football season is fully back, and you can feel the buzz with the research, the drafting, and building of championship squads. If you haven't started or joined the league yet, it is the time, and why not do it on Yahoo Fantasy? I'm doing it on Yahoo Fantasy, and you should too, whether you're a first-timer or a veteran making your millionth league. With the NFL season kickoff on September 4th, now's the time to start playing Yahoo Fantasy, which offers so many fun ways to compete, right? So you can try the brand new Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine League mode, where the lowest scoring team gets eliminated weekly until one team is left standing. Or if you want to play instantly with your friends, try the new Draft with Friends mode. Or if you prefer the classics, get your crew together and go head to head in a private league. And if you don't have a crew, that's not a problem, and you can join a public league. That's the easiest way to play. With the NFL season kicking off on September 4th, don't wait. Start your league now and draft now at yahoofantasy.com/lockedonnfl. That's yahoofantasy.com/lockedonnfl. So obviously losing Kaleb McGary is a significant setback for this team. But Joe, now that training camp is fully played out, and on Tuesday when final cuts are made, it's basically the official end, at least as far as I'm concerned, to training camp. I'm curious, where are you at with your expectations for the season that is quickly coming up? I know obviously the Falcons' goal this season, and the expectation from a lot of folks, myself included, is for this team to make the playoffs. And I'm just curious, have you been heartened, disheartened, or something else when it comes to what you've seen from the Falcons in order to reach that goal this season?
Yeah, I mean, I've been heartened and disheartened, I would say, in certain respects. I guess we can start with the heart. And by the way, this question reminds me of I had a doctor's appointment last week, and like my doctor, who he sees me regularly, he was asking me, he knows what I do for work, and so he's like, so how are the Falcons going to be? And it's like, I don't know. These games are like, you'd be a fool to say that how things are going to work out for most teams in the NFL, honestly, because the games are so close. You play so many tight games. It really does hang on a knife's edge. But I think that we can safely say the Falcons they're going to be exciting on offense. I think one of the ways I've been heartened is just seeing Michael Penix in practice week in, week out. Yes, the completion percentages from in any given practice might not be what you want, but in pretty much every training session, he's making at least one pass that's like, it makes you look around and be like, did you see that? That's insane. That's great. That's great to see. And he's also not really turning the ball over in training camp. Usually if there's somebody who's being as aggressive as he is downfield, and he's being aggressive quite often, they're putting the ball in harm's way constantly. And you see safeties kind of all the time, kind of getting their hands on the football. It really came back starkly for me seeing Cam Ward, who was also in that first day of the joint practices, really wanted to push the ball downfield and really aggressive, and the arm talent was really impressive. But I mean, the Falcons safeties were getting their hands all over the football. They intercepted him multiple times and dropped several other interceptions, and that just, for whatever reason, doesn't seem to happen with Penix, despite the fact that he isn't the most accurate quarterback. And I'm still not exactly sure how to make sense of that in my head, but I guess it can't be a bad thing necessarily for the Falcons. So it's great to see, and it kind of lines up with what he was in college. Like, he had a kind of a shockingly low completion percentage when judged up against his overall turnover worthy plays and such were not that high, and that would also kind of jive with what happened last year. So that's kind of what heartens me about this Falcons team, is just that they're going to be an exciting offense. I think where I'm disheartened is not, the defense or some position group necessarily, but it is having to do with the Kaleb McGary situation, and just how much that injury kind of brings into focus how top heavy this team is and how much lack of depth there is in certain positions. And I've done some shows on my podcast where I've, this is during the off season, going back and examining some of the moves that Terry Fontenot has made, especially the moves that he's been more critiqued over by the national media in particular, and me kind of supporting some of those decisions in light of that critique. But I think what doesn't get critiqued by national media enough, where I think that he should be critiqued, is just the amount of, or the lack of like kind of startable players that have been drafted in rounds 2 through 5, and also his urge to want to trade up to get some of these guys like Arnold Ebiketie, like Matthew Bergeron. Not that, these players aren't worthy of that, but what are you giving up by going up to do that? And what does that leave your roster looking like? And so now I start to wonder, what if they lose a Chris Lindstrom for a period of time, or, any other of these offensive linemen, which could very well happen. I think they're obviously at a place like edge where they've just reinforced really strongly. They're more set, but like a Caden Ellis, thank God for the Falcons that he's been able to play almost every snap over the last couple of years. But what if they lose him? Like, how big of a hole are they in? So that's where I have my fears about this team and what could kind of send them sideways. But overall, I think it's going to be an exciting season for Falcons fans, just to see Michael Penix grow and to see him make all these big plays that I think he's going to make.
Yeah, I don't want to turn this podcast into a Terry Fontenot referendum, but there was a recent rumor about the Jets shopping one of their backup tackles, Carter Warren, Pitt legend, and Warren is one of those players, when I'm talking about Terry Fontenot's propensity and aggressive trading up, that he was the 4th round pick in that 23 draft, that if the Falcons had stayed put and not given up that pick to go up and get Matthew Bergeron, they could have potentially been able to draft Warren at that point in time, and they would have an in-house potential option for, Kaleb McGary, and would have been able to develop their own swing tackle, as opposed to going out that offseason, as you said, and getting Storm Norton, which I believe at that time he was on the Saints rather than the Chargers. But, and I had a Locked On Falcons Insider when I was telling that to the insiders. And again, if you want to join the conversation, hit that link in the description below. A 14-day free trial, $4.99 a month after that. Sorry for plugging. But, and he basically was like, well, hasn't Bergeron been good for us? So why does that matter? And it's like, Bergeron has been a solid piece, but he hasn't been significantly better than the guys at the Falcons if they had just stayed put at that, whatever 40, whatever pick that they were picking and taken. When you look at the next 2 guards off the board, Cody Mock to the Bucks at like 48, and then Osiris Torrance somewhere in the 50s to the Bills, and both of those guys are solid starting right guards in the NFL. And so it just gets to what you're saying, where it's like you're going up, you're being aggressive and going up and getting guys that you like, but your so-called conviction as Terry Fontenot doesn't necessarily show that you have winning instincts, because you're not getting a significantly better player. And you contrast that with, say, Thomas Dimitroff going up and getting Kaleb McGary, for instance, at the end of that first round. And when you look at the next couple of offensive tackles, with the exception of maybe Jawan Taylor, Kaleb McGary has far outshined many of those other offensive tackles and has earned multiple second and now a third contract. And so you can look back at that conviction that Thomas Dimitroff showed back in 2019 and say, okay, that was justified based off of what Kaleb McGary has turned out to, as opposed to what the Falcons would have been available for them had they just stayed put. And again, those are just one example, not to sit here and say that that's the definitive example, right, but it does sort of speak to one of the concerns with this team, and it contributes to the conversation around why Raheem Morris doesn't play guys in the preseason, is because their depth kind of sucks at this point. They have good depth at a couple of key positions like quarterback and running back and safety and edge, but pretty much across the roster, and this is now being exposed with the offensive line, their depth is not that great at a lot of other positions. And, piggybacking on what you were saying earlier, that has the potential to undermine a lot of the things that this team has the potential to do this upcoming season. And so, they'll have to, overcome those issues, starting with the Kaleb McGary injury. But it does sort of speak that, again, not to go after Terry Fontenot on this episode, but, you would think the Falcons 5 years in would be in a slightly better place than this point in time, where we're talking about a talented roster, but also a very flawed roster.
Yeah. And, it's just funny because the national media, will go to war with Terry Fontenot over drafting Bijan Robinson at 8, or, obviously the Michael Penix situation, or, Kyle Pitts at 4, whatever it is, all these, these are more like headline flashy things for them to go after. But now you've got a team where those players are generally fine, but it's like, but if they don't have the supporting cast behind them to help have a stable team for them to operate within, then, what good are they other than, pick up individual awards and things like that. So all that to say is, like, I don't think I give Terry Fontenot more credit. Like, I feel like the national media treats him like the worst general manager in football, like, frankly, because what he's done has been so kind of outrageous to them. And I don't think he's the worst, but I don't think, I think that there are severe flaws in the way that, he's operated in maintaining a high caliber roster across the board. And again, I also want to give him credit. Like, it's tough when you're doing a rebuild. Like, I kind of came in covering the Falcons when they were in 2022, and frankly, they punched above their weight that season with the talent they had on that roster. And it's not easy, the situation that he was in 2021 when he took over. But certainly you have to admit that there's just been too many misses. But, I guess to kind of to go beyond that, I would say also, like, the defense, I think, is going to be kind of similar to the offense, or at least that's how I'm taking it this training camp, where, I think they have an opportunity to make a lot of plays. And, I'm frankly excited to see a younger, more energetic group. And hopefully this is the draft class that they finally hit on some of these later round players with.
To be clear, because I know the comments on this video are going to turn into a civil war over Terry Fontenot and whether or not he's a good GM or not. Yeah. I think he's been pretty middling. I feel like most of the discourse around Terry Fontenot is either extreme on either end, where people are too positive on the job he's done, or people are too negative on the job he's done. Again, despite just spending 5 minutes explaining what one major criticism I have with it, I think he's just kind of in the middle, and he's done an okay job. Basically nothing worthy of such a contentious debate up to this point. But I think, as you say, Joe, the Falcons, I think, have an opportunity to prove him right this upcoming season. And we can look back at 6 months from now, we'll look back and say, hey, a lot of those pieces that he was aggressive going after were a big part of this team's success. And maybe there's going to be a couple of surprises that is sort of emerged as we sit here moving forward, that we're like, oh yeah, that was, that 7th round pick really turned out to be a lifesaver for this football team. So those are going to be obviously the things that we will continue discussing here on Locked On Falcons for the next 4 to 5 months. But Joe, let the people know what, you're going to be getting into and where they can find your stuff over that same period of time.
Yeah, you can find me this year. I have new podcasts, as Aaron mentioned, Joe Patrick on football. So you can find that on 92.9 The Game's YouTube channels, where they get posted. If you want to watch or just listen, you can just search for it wherever you get your podcasts, or on the Odyssey app, of course. And you can follow me at JAPatrick200. I'm up there pretty most days of the week, except for Friday, the last practice. So follow me for updates and things like that. And thank you for having me on, Aaron. Appreciate it.
Look forward to talking with you in the fall when we, talking about real football games at that point in time. So I look forward to our future conversations, Joe. So that's going to do it for us here. Thanks to Joe Patrick. Tomorrow's episode, we'll be looking at those final cuts and we'll breaking them all down. So continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen. For your second listen, check out Locked On Fantasy Football to get you all the tips that you need in order to win your upcoming fantasy football leagues, whether they're on Yahoo Fantasy or some other platform. And of course, make sure you stop on by lockedonpodcast.com/survey to take our survey and win a chance to win one of 10 $100 Amazon gift cards. It is all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.